Thank you. You may be seated. In our text this morning, God's prophet Zechariah has returned with his fellow exiles to the city of Jerusalem. And they've come to rebuild the city and the ruined temple of the city. And the project has begun with high hopes and with great expectations, because they were certain that under the guidance of God, their city and their temple is going to be restored. They're confident that both the city and the temple are going to once again possess their former splendor. Tragically, they are doomed to disappointment. As time goes by, they're going to be confronted by stubborn difficulties. They're going to be confronted by obstacles that seem to make the realization of their dream impossible. So what we're going to find is that God's people are disappointed and God's people are discouraged. That some of them are embittered. Some of them are ready to just give up the project altogether. It's to these disappointed and deeply disillusioned people that God sent Zechariah. Zechariah seems to have been raised up by God to speak a word of encouragement to discouraged people. Zechariah is sent to relight the flame of hope and expectancy that's gone from their lives. Of all of those who help us, of all of those who help us in this business called life, there are few, in my opinion, who are as helpful as those who have the skill to put heart into the hopeless. Those who have the ability to change sobs into songs. This young man that God sent, he did not shut his eyes to the obstacles. He wasn't blind to the problems. But he faced those obstacles and he faced those problems in the light of God. And so facing those problems and facing those obstacles, he spoke these heartening words of our text to those disillusioned people this morning. He said, "Who art thou, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel, thou shalt become a plain." I have a news flash for you. We need that word today. We need it right now. Because in this world we are living in, we too are confronted by obstacles. We're facing international difficulties. There is unrest all over this world of ours this morning. A war is raging in Ukraine. A war is raging in Israel. There are rumors of wars coming from other places in the globe, places like Iran, places like China, places like Taiwan. We face in our own nation threats from terrorists and from nations that support terroristic activities. In nations around the world, there are ruthless dictators in the mold of Hitler and Stalin seeking to conquer other nations. In the midst of all this turmoil and all of this unrest and all of this upheaval, there are multiplied millions of people that are just eager for some kind of lasting peace. There are men and women longing for a sense of security. A sense of security for themselves and their children and their grandchildren. And people wondering, will the day ever come when men shall beat their swords into plowshares? Will the day ever come that spears are turned into pruning hooks? Will the day ever come that men and women learn war no more? Honestly, certainly everyone longs for a day like that. But there seem to be mountains, towering mountains that block the road to permanent world peace. And so we are faced with international difficulties, international problems, and international obstacles. And then we have our problems as a nation. It seems that the divide in our own nation between traditional values and secular humanism, it seems that gulf grows wider every day. Did you ever, in your wildest imagination, dream that the day would come that same-sex marriage was sought to be the norm in our great land? Did you ever think you would see a major political party celebrating and promoting the murder of babies in their mother's womb? Did you ever, in your wildest imagination, think that some pervert would promote a drag queen show for small children? Or even more perverted, that there would actually be religious groups who would sponsor drag queen story hour for little children? Did you ever think the time would come that mediocre male athletes would want to tell people they were winning so they could compete in women's sports with the hope of winning? You know, quite honestly, I remember one of the things we used to say to people on the schoolyard when I was a kid. These men that want to these mediocre athletes that want to transition and say, I'm a woman, so they can compete against women, so they can maybe win. They haven't looked at the downside of that. And the downside is if they get beat, and it'll be like it was when we were kids. Oh, you'd let a girl beat you? See, they hadn't thought about the downside of that. But did you ever think you'd see that kind of, I'm just going to say it, that kind of idiotic perversion in this great land of ours? Did you ever think, and I'm going to stop because this could go on a while, but did you ever think we would see the kind of things we're seeing going on in this country today? I didn't. And we observe our elected officials, those that have been elected to serve the people, who think that somehow they've been elected to be over the people. And we look at those that are elected to public office, and we long for a time when there used to be statesmen in this country. Long for a time when there were men and women unselfishly motivated by a desire to do the right thing and actually help their fellow man. We long for a time when there were sacrificial leaders that would actually work for the common good. And instead of that, we had cheap politicians engaged in a mad battle for supremacy and power, determined to try and master each other and master the people they're elected to serve without any regard whatsoever for what is ultimately best for the common good of those they've been elected to serve, and absolutely zero regard for what is right and moral. Make no mistake about it. We are today confronted by some grim national problems. And then we have our challenges as a church. Due to various influences on our lives, religion in America has largely gone out of favor. You turn on the television set, and television and the movies today portray all manner of illicit sexual activity as being glamorous and enticing. And if you have a television show where there's a father involved, the father is a strong family figure of right and wrong has gone out of style. If a television program portrays a preacher as a part of the cast, He's usually portrayed as some kind of a caricature or a buffoon or a caricature of a preacher with serious moral failures. Homosexuality is glorified on television as an acceptable alternative lifestyle. And as a result of all of these influences, as a society, we have become desensitized. Things that used to shock us to our very core don't even surprise us anymore. Things that used to shock us now just cause us to shake our heads. Nationally, all over this country, church attendance and church membership are in a serious and steep decline. And the smaller rural church faces even larger obstacles because we've become a society that wants instant gratification. We've become a society of people who no longer want to invest ourselves in a project. We've become people who want instant gratification, so no one really wants to be part of the hard work and the heavy lifting of building a great church. People want to go somewhere where all the hard work and all the heavy lifting's been done, and they can just sit back and enjoy what somebody else has already done. And so because of this, we, us, you and I, have to be alert for opportunities of evangelism. Now don't get scared when I say that. You've heard me enough and listened enough. By evangelism, I don't mean everybody needs to take this put the Bible in their arm and go out and start knocking doors all afternoon, this afternoon. By evangelism, I mean we need to exemplify Jesus Christ in our lives every day. We need to live so that others could see Jesus living in us. And we need to make sure we magnify the church and we exalt the church and we don't tear the church down. And that means we speak well of our brethren. We speak well of our church family. We speak well of our home church. Let me ask you a question. Would you want to be part of an organization where those who belong to that organization were constantly complaining and criticizing and tearing down the organization to those they talked to? Well, no. So how, in the name of common sense, over the years, have people expected the same folks they've complained to about the church to come and see what the church is all about when they invited them to come? We have to speak well of the church. We've got to speak well of our brethren. We've got to speak well of one another. Yes, we face our difficulties as a church. And guess what? All of us face our difficulties as individuals too. Some today, perhaps even sitting right here, are looking with eyes full of foreboding at mountains that seem to block their path. For some, it might be an economic difficulty. Perhaps it's facing a prospect of want when once there was plenty. Or maybe it's a loss of robust health. Just can't seem to do the things we used to do. Or maybe it's some personal loss, the blighting of some hope, the death of some dear dream, the loss of a loved one. And for some, I've even known it was the seeming impossibility of being what they long to be. Or maybe it's the seeming impossibility of doing what they're longing to do. Whatever it might be, right now, this morning, every one of us, all of us have our own individual difficulties. All of us have our own mountains blocking our path. The question then becomes, what do we do about it? What can we do about our difficulties? There's one thing that's certain. All of us react to our mountains in different ways, but we react in some manner. There are some people that just close their eyes to the mountain and ignore it altogether. And that can be a very real remedy, provided the mountain is not a reality. Sometimes that can be the case. Sometimes the mountain is not a reality. Oftentimes we build vast suspension bridges to cross raging rivers in our mind that turn out to be dried up mud puddles when we actually come to them. But sometimes the mountains are real. And what do we do when that happens? What do we do when the mountains are real? Some folks coming upon a mountain refuse either to level it with the ground, and they refuse to scale it. And those are the folks that believe the supreme purpose of life should be to find not character, but comfort. They stand at the forks of the road and they don't ask which path leads to the goal. Which path avoids the mountain? Which path is the easiest to travel? And they're determined they're going to live on Easy Street. And what happens is Easy Street usually dead ends at Rotten Row. Making ease the test of conduct is a surefire way to make a tragic mess of this business of living. Jeroboam wrecked a whole nation that way. When Jeroboam became king of the 10 tribes, he realized that while the Israelites were a divided nation politically, the Israelites were still one religiously. And Jeroboam was afraid if they continued to be united in religion, that they would continue to be one in religion, they would soon become one politically. So he set therefore about the task of dividing them religiously. Almost sounds familiar. How did he go about it? He didn't tell them their religion was wrong. He told them it was too costly. And they could get by with far less expense. And this was his word. He said, it's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. So he created an alternate place for them to worship. Write this down. It's on the final exam. To demand an easy way out of a hard situation is a sure road to failure. But there are others that bravely go forward until their smooth road just seems to come to a dead end. And they come to some mountain, and when they come to the mountain, they just make an abject surrender. Sometimes these fall in self-pity. They wail bitterly, why? Why did this have to happen to me? But whether in cowardly self-pity or in bitterness, they tell themselves the mountain can't be made into a plain, and the mountain cannot be scaled, and so what they do is accept defeat as being final and complete. But there's a fourth group. This group does not shut their eyes. This group does not demand an easy way. This group does not surrender. This group defies their mountains. They either level those mountains with the plain or they climb over those mountains. That's the possibility ahead of those discouraged people that Zechariah was speaking to. And that's the possibility for me, and it's the possibility for you. And it's the word for every one of us this morning. Who art thou, O mountain? Before me thou shalt become a plain. How? How do we do it? How do we master the mountains that we come to in our lives? In winning the victory, we have to realize the mountains that we face are not altogether unique. Oh, we face challenges sometimes. And when we face challenges, we feel like no one else has ever been confronted with the ugly challenges we have to face. But difficulties and challenges are incidental to the business of living. Life. If life is of any value at all, it's a conflict. And that's especially true of the Christian life. If you've made up your mind to be a follower of Jesus Christ, you had better make up your mind to fight, and to fight gallantly. Jesus was eager and is eager for people to follow him. But you know, Jesus never appealed in the long ago, and Jesus does not appeal now to the loyalty of any man or woman on the basis that this loyalty is going to cost that man or that woman absolutely nothing. Jesus knew that to follow him was surely to get into trouble. Do you remember one time someone came to Jesus and said, "Lord, are there few that be saved?" And Jesus didn't even give him a straight answer. He didn't give him the desired answer. He didn't say whether there would or wouldn't be many that would be saved. Jesus said, "Strive to enter at the straight gate." The word translated strive there, and that word strive itself. Think about that word strive. That's a word that's wet with sweat and flecked with blood. Strive. That's a muscular word. That's a battling word. It means fight to enter in. It means to agonize, somewhat of the way that Jesus agonized that night that he prayed in Gethsemane and sweat as great drops of blood fell from his brow. Do we sometimes find life to just be a fight? If we find life sometimes to be a fight, it's nothing more than what's to be expected. If we are escaping all conflict, we better look to our guideposts. Because if we're escaping all conflict, chances are we're on the wrong road. But what we must ever keep in mind, there is no difficulty that can bring about our final defeat. We can make every single opposition minister to our enrichment. Paul found that true on so many occasions. And Paul reached a definite conclusion. You remember what he wrote in Romans 8, verse 28? He said, "For we know." What do we know, Paul? All things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to his purpose. Paul didn't say that everything that happens to us in life is going to be good. But Paul said all things work together for good. Now we have to remember that the good, we're not necessarily going, this life is not permanent for us. And when Paul talks about our good, he's talking about the good of our home eternally in heaven. All things work together for good. All things work together to prepare us to be fit subjects for that place called heaven in the great after a while. All things work together for good, for the ultimate good of them that love God, to them that are called according to his purpose. Every difficulty, every problem, every trial, every challenge adds to our enrichment. If we're going to change our mountains into plains, we've got to be undergirded for something, with something. And that is a vital faith in God. The songs we sang this morning were not by accident. Faith is the victory. The victory in Jesus. God And God alone is our adequacy for meeting the impossibilities of life. It's through faith in God we achieve the impossible within ourselves. Jesus is constantly calling us to what in our own strength we cannot accomplish. But in His strength we can. One day Jesus looked into the face of a man that had been flat on his back for 38 years. And Jesus commanded this man to do the impossible. This man had been flat on his back for 38 years, and Jesus said, "Rise, take up thy bed and walk." For this man, that day, the impossible became the possible because of Jesus Christ. And he rose up and he walked. Jesus calls me and you to a life of obedience, to make Him the Lord and the Master of our lives. When we in obedient faith put our Lord on in baptism, the impossible becomes possible. And to be new creations in Jesus, to love our neighbor as ourselves, those seem like big impossibilities, but through obedience to the gospel and through living God's kind of life, they are possible. That's what I'm asking you to do this morning. If Jesus Christ is not the Lord and the Master of your life, make Him Lord and Master of your life. If He's not Lord and Master of all of your life, then He's not Lord and Master at all in your life. But in simple, trusting faith, turn your back upon sin, make confession of His name, be buried in the waters of baptism for the remission of past sins. Through obedience to Jesus Christ, be able to say, "O great mountain, before me, through the power of Jesus Christ, thou shalt become a plain." I don't know what's going on in your world. I don't know what's going on in your life this morning. But let's be standing together right now. And as we stand together, we're going to sing this song. If there's something we can help you with in your obedience to Jesus Christ to turn the mountains of your life into a plain, come and let us help you.